first guest this morning is Deputy Leader of New Zealand First, the Minister for, Regional Development, Shane Jones. We had him on earlier in the week talking about the let's kind of get New Zealand moving, fast-track resource management approval for major projects. But also this week we have looked at an issue that he's going to talk to today, and that is the issue of the, well, I'm going to say insidious injection of the principles or the Treaty of Waitangi into all sorts of laws and parts of New Zealand life in the last 30 or 40 years. None more disturbing, I would have thought, than the discussion we had with Gary Judd yesterday, when we find that the people who set the curriculum for lawyers in New Zealand are, from January 1st next year, going to have a compulsory section on tikanga Māori, which is essentially a superstition or a religious belief, which is absolutely amazing. So joining us to discuss how this coalition government is going to, well, remove the principles of the treaty and the treaty from places it doesn't belong is Shane Jones. Shane, thank you for joining us again.
Hey, morning. Kia ora, folks. I'm sitting outside the Auckland airport with a little bit of rain, but always a pleasure to chat with you, mate.
Can I just ask you, what is the point and who is going to run this program to remove unnecessary or irrelevant references to the Treaty of Waitangi from our legislation?
Well, obviously it's in the coalition agreement. Such matters ordinarily are taken care of by the Minister of Justice and take advice from the Attorney General as well. It's a big body of work. The first 100 days are over. However, this is a priority on our work program. It's not only dealing with the references to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, it's also working out whether or not the writ of the Waitangi Tribunal itself is still fit for purpose. Now, it'll kick off in gusto, I would say, after we've bedded down the budget, which is, 6-8 weeks away.
Yeah. Okay, so it kicks off then. Is it going to be in the next 100-day plan, or is it a more overarching and longer-term piece of work for the coalition?
Well, the first thing is there will be no more fresh clauses introduced into legislation, which is ordinarily regarded as a treaty clause. Secondly, you're right to point out that it is an overarching, longer-term body of work. But mate, I've got to say to you, I'm dealing with a difficult situation, i.e., trying to rehabilitate the Ruapehu ski fields, where about $40 million has been tossed into it over the last 4 or 5 years. One of the issues hobbling the ability of us to sell it is a concession from DOC. DOC can't offer concessions any longer unless they show a high level of fidelity to the Section 4 Treaty of Waitangi reference.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, it's got so constipated. It's a small example where what we should be doing, in my view, is distilling what that actually means.
Yeah.
Does it
Mind
mean
you, there are other factors there at Ruapehu, and that is that all that land was gifted to the Crown for a specific purpose. And local Māori are saying, if you're not going to use it for that purpose, or we want to have some say in it.
Yeah, it's not actually to do with the title. It's more a comment, do you or don't you want this type of economic activity in your area? If you don't, fine. I'll go and spend that money elsewhere. If you do, it does involve trade-offs. We can't cling religiously to these principles references without being mindful that there are consequences. It's really all I'm saying, mate. But no one wants to hear. Well,
let's look at two other examples we've covered, and we broke last year the story of the compulsory to treaty training for real estate agents as part of their compulsory retraining last year. And we have highlighted two things in the last 2 weeks here on this program. The fact that Auckland University is now requiring all students in any course to do a kind of tikanga Māori compulsory course about the evils of colonialism and the importance of the principles of the treaty. And we find also that all lawyers in future, from January 1st next year, will have to take a compulsory course in tikanga Māori. And we had Gary Judd QC saying what a ridiculous state of affairs that was on this program yesterday. Are these the sort of things that this review can go and weed out and get rid of?
Well, both of those institutions, the Law Society, let's just start there, mate, they jealously guard their, shall I call, operational sovereignty.
But they're a statutory body created by an act of Parliament.
But having said that, they also are challenging the rule of law and replacing it with the rule of lawyers. And that's a deep problem beyond just that institution. All you've got to do is look at whether or not we have a case now where Parliament needs to reaffirm its sovereignty, and where there are ill-conceived, vaguely worded or poorly understood provisions in law that Parliament seizes the issue and gives it a huge level of specificity so that we can't have these situations. I'll give you another one, mate. How come Meridian had to pay $200 million in order to proceed with their resource consent? And I'm told that $200 million was passed over last year. In my time, I'm looking into this. I can't believe that, number one, that could be true. Number two, that the New Zealand economy is saddled with those types of transaction costs. Coming back to the lawyers themselves are entangled with that issue. I mean, I could look at it, but I'm so busy on about the 55.
Well, okay, but hang on, Minister. You said you're going to get meaningless references to the Treaty of Waitangi out of our legislation. So we've got to get it out of everything. And my point I make to you, you could make this job a lot easier if, for goodness sake, we defined what the principles of the treaty are, and we decide, because all the stuff, the real estate stuff, the lawyer stuff is all being run because the Crown considers itself signatory to a treaty which, on the interpretation of Lord Cook of Thornton's ruling back in the 80s, requires the government to have a partnership with Māori. That is what is driving every single one of these pieces of lunacy. So surely wouldn't it be easier simply to say that principle of the treaty is bunk? The government of New Zealand is not in a bicameral system with iwi, and we do not need to pay lip service, or indeed real service, to the idea that there are two governing entities in New Zealand. That's the very debate that ACT wants to have.
But it's also an agenda that has been pushed vigorously over the last 3 years since we tried to operationalise the discredited United Nations Puapua report. Now that has been turbocharged. I think you could say that in the 90s and in Helen Clark's time, Sean, these issues enjoyed quite the level of frenzied sort of interest that is currently the case. But I want to come back to what we said we're going to do. Where there is a treaty provision, at the end of the day, we have to sort of work with our two partners. And if it is to remain in law, then its actual meaning needs to be spelt out in legislation. It means consultation. It means engagement. It means nothing at all, therefore it should be removed. And we're going to, it is a painstaking exercise, but we're going to work through it.